You know, everything was going really well today so far. Then I went and dropped my camera, which is this happened. But what's not disappointing is the fact that I have another big box behind me, because what's in the box, hiding beneath plain sight, is carbon fiber. Carbon fiber for an M4, which was provided to us by Adro. But what I want to talk about before we even go into installing carbon fiber and doing a whole video on it is some tips and tricks for it. Because every single once in a while when we're getting car parts, it's a little bit like going through Christmas or a birthday or any sort of holiday in which we get to unwrap something incredibly quick, which inevitably results in most people rushing through installing it and sometimes doing it wrong, sometimes making mistakes, and otherwise just breaking it because they don't know how to actually handle some carbon fiber. So I thought I'd give you a couple tips and tricks in terms of how to handle carbon fiber, how to drill into it, and some things to avoid if you are going into installing carbon fiber or at least buying it. Thank you to Adro for supplying us with a full carbon kit. It's M4, it's wet carbon, it looks super sick. I'm very, very excited to show you guys this on the car, but let's just get into unboxing it. Move this piece of junk out of here. Give me this bad boy, big box stuff. Now, when you're going to install carbon fiber, or at least when you buy it, the first thing to remember is not all of it's gonna come in a really nice box like this. Sometimes it gets shipped in a crappy box, in which case, the most important thing before you even jump into installing your carbon fiber is inspecting it. Now, just like inspecting an Xbox 360 when you were 16 years old, you actually wanna take a look at the part before you install it. There's a few things I always keep an eye out for. The first one that I do is check the carbon lay. A lot of times people will get a little bit cheap with how they do the carbon lay. They'll put a cut right here, dead ass in the middle of the piece, because it's hard to bend the carbon over to give it that one piece look. So they'll just cut it in half and then they'll lay the other half in the mold. This one doesn't have that, which is actually very nice. The second thing you want to keep in mind on is how actually good and even is the clear. How does the resin look? Does it look faded? Does it look like any place they may have missed it? A lot of times the places that I actually look are the same places I look for the crease. Any sort of small wedge or pinch I take a look at, and sometimes even I'll take a look over here to see where exactly did they end the carbon. So you want to make sure that you keep an eye on that so that you know if you have a quality carbon piece. And the very last thing that I always keep an eye on, which is the biggest mistake of all, is do these pieces come pre-drilled or not pre-drilled? Now, a lot of carbon companies aren't doing pre-drilled stuff. That's just a thing, they don't do it. Sometimes they'll put indents in the actual mold, which is fine, but keep an eye on that before you go into installation, because a lot of times people will see this and then they end up just double-sided taping the whole thing and just praying that it holds together, and you don't want to do that. Look inside, take a peek at all the little nooks and crannies, because a lot of times when you go to bolt these things up, you're gonna be drilling into this. If you want to do it the right way, you're gonna be drilling into it. Now, this is not an Adro carbon fiber part. This is actually an old lip that I got for the 430. And this one came broke before I even had a chance to install it. And this is what you're gonna see sometimes with shipping damage if it's not properly supported. And that's why it's really important you keep an eye out for this sort of stuff. Even if the clear is just slightly cracked, or if you see that resin has hit a weak point, you're gonna wanna just take this and give it back as fast as you can. Carbon fiber is very, very strong, and it's very, very light, but it needs to be manufactured the right way. Otherwise, it's kind of a pile of shit. And you'll see these weak points happen, which causes that. Ow. And then it's just a matter of time. Ow. And the last thing to mention is, sure, you're going to get some parts that can't be bolted on, that can't use a tap and die set, that can't find a way other than to be double-sided tape. I hear you, and I wish it didn't exist, but you are gonna want to then do it the right way. You can trace as much as you can for the double-sided tape, but make sure you're actually treating the application that this is getting put on. And what I mean by that is cleaning it, getting it up to a good temperature so that the adhesive actually sticks, applying adequate pressure for at least 60 seconds, and then double checking this of like a couple days later. This is like the most formal way of saying check your shit. If you're afraid of touching a part after you install it because you're afraid that it's gonna fall apart, you probably installed it the wrong way. Now, as I exploded my very nice 8-year-old fold-out table, Adro actually sends you some of the stuff that I'm talking about. This is just a super primer. You can clean it off. It allows you to get greater adhesive. Everybody's gonna have their own version, or you're gonna get something similar. You can use this. If you're not comfortable with it, then go get something else. But needless to say, it's very important that you treat whatever it is that you're about to double-side tape onto a card. Another thing I always kind of catch or see people give a little bit of crap to is when carbon fiber has flex. Carbon fiber is gonna have flex. It's gonna feel light. It's gonna feel thin. That's the whole point of carbon fiber. The strength is in the weave. It's not in the weight of the carbon. So it's important that when you're treating it, you don't have to be super nice to it, but you do have to understand that it does wiggle around and it does move around a little bit. The last thing I'm gonna talk about, and sometimes people will get these, sometimes people won't, depending on what brand you get. I like it because Adro actually supplies it, is that when you're going into making the holes for your side skirts and things like that, you need to understand if you're gonna be using bolts. If you're gonna be using the OEM bolt, the OEM screws, if you're gonna tap it yourself, what are you actually gonna do? I would highly recommend, for obvious reasons and for the sake of my sanity and the chances that there's something beyond my life, to not use self-tappers. Use the supplied equipment if you can. And if you can't, then get something that's gonna work very, very well. For me, I typically use anywhere up to a 5mm bolt with a washer to make sure that it actually seats correctly. All right, so now let's say you're pretty much good to go. It goes into actually deciding if you're really willing to commit and drill into your carbon fiber, which you should be. And here's a couple tips in terms of how to actually drill into your carbon fiber. And you're gonna need whatever rinky-dink tool you have. And if you're a Milwaukee boy, good for you. I'm so proud of you. Get your actual drill bits, get some painter's tape. You can put a blanket down if you're feeling a little soft with your carbon fiber. That's completely fine. But you're gonna wanna make sure that you don't drill from the inside out. Whatever piece you're actually exposing to the general public, to the car show attendees, don't drill that way. Because what's gonna happen is a lot of times that clear and that resin is going to actually get pressure as the drill bit's going up. You know what I'm saying? So you wanna drill downwards into the hidden part, because sometimes it's gonna put more pressure on the underside and you may actually get a little resin buildup. You may get a little bit more of a perforation on the clear breaking out from the drill bit. Now I'm going to put down the tape. If you've got the thin boy tape, I usually do recommend like a 2x2 or a 3x3. And what that's gonna do is it kind of gives you a little bit more ease when you're drilling into something, and it minimizes the potential fray. You have to remember that you're drilling into a weaved fabric. Now I'm not gonna drill into this one because obviously I need to check 27,000 times before I actually drill that, but I still wanna show you guys a couple examples of what happens if you drill something right versus when you drill something wrong. So of course we're gonna get old trusty back here. I'm gonna show you a little bit of the differences between what happens when you prep it versus when you don't. But what's really important to remember with any sort of carbon fiber installation is that the prep work is really what's gonna make the difference between you having a good time with this and you also just having a really bad time with this. Set a little marker. For me, in the past, what I've done is I've used 3mm going up to 5, because that's what I used on the 430. Start small, start little, and then gradually get bigger as time goes on. This is again an optional tip as well. You can go into it and you can say, I wanna drill as hard as I possibly can and just go nuts, which you can do. I mean, I just did it. A lot of times what will happen is if you're too aggressive, or if you don't prep it right, or if you do something, you can be drilling and then you move it and you end up getting it scratched. I'm gonna give you one last tip. Depending on how sensitive or how fragile your carbon may be, when you're going in to drill your carbon fiber and you're going in and you're setting it, use the drill bit in the opposite direction. It's gonna help a little bit, and go nice and slow. And as you go through, you can just apply a little bit more pressure, and you're gonna start to see that it's already gonna be kicking out some of that resin and some of that clear, and it's gonna get it out of the way. You see how it's kicking the resin up? And there you go. Now, if you wanna go into a bigger drill bit, you can obviously do so. My recommendation is to do the very same thing though. Don't get too crazy and try to jump up to what you need. Add that larger drill bit, going nice and slow, speed up, apply that pressure all the way through, and then back out. You're good to go. Again, drill through, slow and steady wins the race. Now just for the good old craps and giggles, if we don't prep it, you're dealing with a smoother surface. We're going right into the 3/16. We're gonna apply a little bit of pressure, we're gonna drill down. You get the same thing. Sure, it's a little bit faster, but you see how much of a mess you end up actually kicking up. And you start to see that you've created a fracture here, which can grow if you apply additional pressure to the bolt or whatever it is that you're using to install the lip. Lastly, I'm gonna show you what happens when you drill from the inside out. You hear that crack? You see these carbon frays? That's a problem, because over time, that's gonna get more and more exposed, and it's gonna untwine itself over time. A lot of times people make this mistake, and that's what makes them so scared to end up drilling their carbon fiber. You break this clear And sure, I exaggerated for comedic purposes, but you create this fracture and now your clear's broken, your carbon looks like it's an absolute mess, your resin's all over the place, whereas what you could have done, you create a nice, clean hole. Hard to tell the difference between the two, but the left side you can see that that carbon still got messed up because we put a lot of pressure in there as we were trying to drill that hole through. Versus on the other side, you can see it's nice and clean, very, very smooth, makes it actually easy to tap if you need to. Not that you would, just depending on the carbon piece that you have. And it also just looks better. Now, sometimes carbon does come with these indentations. What's very, very important is that if you go to install the bolts into these and you have a washer, just be conscious on how big the washer is compared to how big the indentation is. Because sometimes what will happen with the washer is you're putting pressure outside of this indentation when maybe you didn't need to begin with. Maybe your bolt already has a small washer attached to it. That's all you need. It sets in here really nice and clean. You don't need to go overboard and put a 2-inch washer on that bad boy. So now you're on to the final part. You're ready to actually install the carbon fiber. You're ready to put it on the car and be done because it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're already late to actually going to bed. Once you have your holes drilled and everything's ready to rock and roll and you go to mount it up, don't do the same thing that you probably did with your first exhaust install. Get everything mocked up accordingly and then apply the pressure to actually bolt it in forever. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, make sure you're doing it in the way that you would want to so that you can actually move it around a little bit while it's mounted up. Now this one's already ready to rock and roll. This is the diffuser from Adro. This is the last piece that we'll be throwing on the M4 competition, which I'm really excited for, and I think it's gonna look really good. One of the last pieces that I do, and you don't have to if you don't want to, but I painter's tape as much as I can. I'll painter's tape the actual piece to the car prior to throwing the first few bolts in. I'll painter tape edges, things like these fins, just to be safe, because every once in a while when you're moving a piece that's weird like this, you can hit things, you can scratch things. So I just try to avoid it as much as I can. So let me know if any of this helped below. Of course, thank you so much for watching. The next video that you probably see is gonna be us actually installing this Adro M4 carbon fiber kit, which if you're interested, you can check it out below. I'm really excited to get that done. Let me know if you've made any of the mistakes that I have. I totally have before. That's why there's an onslaught of carbon fiber parts literally everywhere in my garage. My only goal here is to maybe give you a couple more tips and tricks that I wish somebody told me. Maybe less nasally, but it would have been nice if they would have told me. So, yeah. Bye.